Chrissy, I see a couple participants who keep popping up as having their uh, devices unmuted. You may need to call them out by name. I hate to suggest that, but
I'll just try and look through everyone. Okay. Oh.
Can I just? I think if we're going to record, I'm not sure. Am I coming through or not? I'm not sure if I'm coming through.
yes, you are, Jim.
Okay.
So welcome, Jim, from Radio Emma Toc.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It's lovely to see. I can't see everyone on the screen now, just a few on the right hand side here, but it's now there's some feedback coming through. I don't know what's happening there. Can you hear me? Okay, that's the main thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to say, if there's any problem, Chrissy, if you just put something in the chat box, that will then come through. That will come through to me, so you can still contact me. Right, so I'm actually getting a funny noise coming through. I'm going to turn my sound down. So just a thumbs up if you can all hear me okay. Brilliant, that's fine. Okay, well, hello to everyone. I'm Jim Salmon. I live in Chelmsford in the UK. Very lucky to live here because Chelmsford has a great radio connection, being the home of the first radio factory in the UK, Guglielmo Marconi's factory. But primarily I'm here today to talk about Radio Emma Toc. I thought I'd split my talk into three sections. Firstly, how I got interested in radio, then me as a listener, and then moving on to being a broadcaster. So by all means, Chrissy, if I go on too long, can you just wave your hands? I can see Chrissy, Terry and Richard on the screen. So if I'm going on too long, just gesticulate at me, please. Okay. So Radio Emma Toc, well, I've got my logo there. Some people are a few flippant and with. Some people have said that I've copied my logo from other people. Well, let's have a look. Not so sure about that. Maybe I have. You can see a bit of a similarity there. But I am in very good company. Our local radio club, the Chelmsford Amateur Radio Society, I think they've copied the logo as well. Yes, and even Radio Caroline, I think they were guilty of copying the Marconi label. But if you're going to copy someone, you might as well copy someone who's very good. My other logo, someone said this looked a bit like the BBC World Service. I don't really see it myself, but because theirs is red and mine is blue, but maybe, okay, I am guilty of that. So, a couple of, a very poignant thing to start with. I always wonder how I got interested in radio, because it is a bit of a strange hobby. I'm sure we'll all admit that. A few years ago, I found online, and suddenly thought, well, that's interesting. So the BBC Empire service, which I think became the BBC World Service, started in December 1932. And I thought, well, that's interesting because my dear mother was born in 1932. In fact, she was born in December 1932. In fact, she was born on the 19th of December 1932. So that's quite nice for me because I'm a great fan of the BBC World Service. And I like the fact that my mother was born on the actual day that the BBC Empire service started. On a much lesser note, the Today programme on Radio 4, which is not the longest running programme, but a very long running programme, well-respected programme. I don't know if you can read that on the screen share there, but it was it launched in October 1957. I think you know where I'm going to go with this. It launched on the 28th of October 1957, and that was the day I was born. So I share my birth, not my birthday, but my birth date with the Today programme. So 28th of October is when I was born. So moving on to what got me interested in radio, perhaps that's the fate or the coincidence, I don't know. Perhaps it's fate that I should be interested in radio. So born in 1957 means that in 1970, I was 13 years old. And it was a great time to be listening to the radio, listening to music. And this brightly coloured ship turned up off the Essex coast and started transmitting as Radio North Sea International. And I have to say, I was hooked from the start. listen to the dramas and the jamming and everything that went along with that radio station. So that got me interested in listening to the radio. Then became interested in other stations that were then transmitting off the Dutch coast. This was a fascinating station, Capital Radio from the King David. Lovely aerial system on this ship. As a radio ham, that's probably more interesting than some of the programs were. So it wasn't very successful. They had a lot of problems with it, but that was an interesting station. Another station that I really loved listening to as a kid was Radio Atlantis, especially in 1974 when they, before they closed down, they ran an all English programming for a week. And that was a very good station. But of course, the station that really captured me at that time was Radio Caroline, which had come back. And I listened to Caroline continuously from their return in 1970, sank in 1980. Actually was listening at the time when their ship was sinking and the crew were taken off on the lifeboat. Never believed they'd ever return, but thankfully I was proven wrong, because in 1983 they returned with an amazing vessel called the Ross Revenge, and with this amazing 300-foot mast, they produced a very good signal. And throughout the 1980s, well, up until that mast fell down, they produced a very good, strong signal and some excellent programming. So I listened to Caroline then until they had to shut down in 1990, and still listen today. One of the fortunate things about living in Chelmsford is that the Ross Revenge is now, albeit with a much smaller mast, is anchored in the River Blackwater, which is only 20 miles away from me. So often when we're driving around Essex, we like visiting the coastline. We can see this little red dot, and I'm always looking out for the Caroline ship. So I took this picture about 3 years ago, and here's myself and my good lady Anne, and we went out on a boat trip to the Ross Revenge from West Mersey, and spent about 2 hours on board. And fascinating ship. I have been on it before as a visitor when it was out in the South Falls Head. But it's still a fascinating place to visit, and if you ever get the chance, I highly recommend it. So that's, I guess, really how I became interested in listening to the radio. Above all, I am a listener. I put myself as a listener first, because I think that's one of the most important things. So onto my journey into broadcasting. Well, back in the 1990s, I used to know a chap who was running a shortwave transmitter. Probably best not to say too much about all that, but it did result in me coming out with a program called Optimod, the monthly media magazine, and that used to go out every month for about 2 years on a transmitter on shortwave in the 48-meter band, and really enjoyed doing that. Loosely based on a station called Radio Facts that was transmitting before this, an information station. And well, it was an enjoyable project to do. I got a lot of letters in from a lot of reception reports in from across Europe. Still have a box up on my shelf here of reception reports and cassette tapes that people send in to me. One of the differences between then and now, obviously, was the fact that people used to write letters to us and send cassette tapes. Nowadays, obviously, it's email and it's MP3 files attached to an email. But there was still the enthusiasm for shortwave. That's still present today. As it, one thing that hasn't changed since those days is an excellent magazine that I get every month, which will make a few of you smile, the British EDXC Communication magazine. And I was a member of the British EDXC Club back in 1993. I think my membership number is 1214, which always annoyed me a little bit because I wanted to be 1215 because that's a radio frequency. And again, I'm sure a lot of you will understand what I'm saying there. You'd probably also be able to guess a lot of my passwords because they're all radio frequencies. So communication back in the day, 1993. And at that time, I used to always be interested to know whether I would be listed in it. And I don't know whether you can make this out, but somewhere down here on 6238 kilohertz, there is Optimod is listed along with the Belgian International Relay Service and Radio Merlin. So connections between all of those. So that's Communication Now. That's the latest edition. The difference now, I'm still listed in Communication Now. The difference now is I've moved from the alternative airwaves section to the legitimate sections. So bit of a change there. But it's a brilliant magazine. I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted here. I'm sure you all actually received this magazine. So a good chance for me to say thank you to everyone involved in producing that, because I still enjoy reading it every month. My wife still can't understand how I can sit and read 4, 5, 6 pages of numbers. But I say, well, it's interesting to me. But I don't think I'm ever going to persuade her that. Okay, so leading on from the 1990s, I then dabbled in community radio. A lot of people in the UK in the early 2000s were getting interested in community radio because the licensing laws opened up. So people were now allowed to get a short-term license. And we operated 4 times as a local station here in Chelmsford under what they call restricted service licenses. And I then actually did obtain a full-time community radio license, but that's a whole nother story, and I won't go into that now. But I was very successful in obtaining a license and totally unsuccessful in realizing that it's a 7 days a week job running a radio station. So that station didn't last very long. But after a few years later, into the 2010s, I started getting interested in the fact that shortwave was changing. And whilst a lot of the bigger stations were coming off of shortwave, there were relay stations. There were relay stations that had already existed, but there were new relay stations coming up as well, which was very interesting for me because it gave people like me, which effectively I'm just a hobbyist or an enthusiast, it gave people like me the opportunity to actually get our programs put out on substantial transmitters. And that hadn't been possible before. A lot of the pirate transmitters that had been running in the 90s were probably in the order of 50 watts or 100 watts if they were lucky. But suddenly there were relay stations supplying airtime on 10 kilowatt transmitters, 100 kilowatt transmitters. And so that became more interesting. And I thought, well, let's give this a go. And using the name Chelmsford Calling, firmly tongue-in-cheek, I said, well, let's call it the World Service. Why not? And so I produced a program and approached the relay stations, and that was put out on stations in Germany, Finland, America, and we'll come on to relay stations a bit later. But it was a lovely project to do, and I never intended it to go on for very long, but I did that for over a year, and again got lovely responses from people, and it introduced me to shortwave broadcasting again, and a much further reach with some of the larger relay stations. As always in life, things go on and other things happen, and there's not always time. So I think this was back in 2015 I did this. So stopped after a year, but at the time I was a radio ham. My call sign is 2E0RMI, and as a member of the local radio club, we've often transmitted from, sorry, that's a QSL from Chelmsford Calling. Going on, we've often transmitted from a strange hut in our industrial museum. Here's a picture of the hut. It's in our Sandford Mill Industrial Museum, and nearly 100 years ago, this hut was here. It was in a field in Writtle on the outskirts of Chelmsford, and it was owned by the Marconi Company. And it was actually the place where the first regular entertainment broadcast station started in the UK. Wasn't the first radio station, wasn't the first station to play entertainment programs, but it's really quite a pivotal moment in radio history, because it was the first time that a regular program was put out every Tuesday evening. And there was an amazing bunch of people who were running this radio station. Just in this one picture alone, there are 3 people who went on to become the first 3 chief engineers of the BBC. So this is back in 1922, February 1922, this radio station started. And because it was the first of its kind in the UK, as a regular station, it had a fantastic following. So I became very interested in the story of 2MT. The station was called 2MT. Became very interested in the story, and got friendly with a chap who has followed the history of this, a chap called Tim Wander, who's written books on the station, and we thought, well, let's do a celebration broadcast. So in 2017, when the station was 95 years old, or would have been 95, we operated a 3-day internet radio station, something new for me, transmitting, or not transmitting, but actually relaying programs via the internet. And we were actually able to do some of the programs from the actual hut itself. So this is a picture, February 2017, where we called the station Radio Emma Toc, and we transmitted, or we relayed programs. We didn't actually transmit because we were on the internet. We relayed programs from the hut itself. The picture behind me is a replica of the original transmitter that was built back in 1922. Excellent, good response again. People seemed interested in the story of 2MT. Most of the programs came, or some programs came from the hut, some came from a little room in the roof of my house, which is my own home studio. And it was an enjoyable experience. Once again, those very good people from the British EDXC Club included me on the back page of their magazine. So I'm very, very pleased for that. And it was an enjoyable experience. Some people ask why my project is called Radio Emma Toc. Basically, the station that inspired me, 2MT, from nearly 100 years ago, 2MT had to announce their call sign at regular intervals, and the phonetic alphabet they used in those days was different to what we use now. So M then was Emma and T was Toc. So they used to say this is 2 Emma Toc calling, 2 Emma Toc. So I thought that's a nice name, a nice quirky little name. So hence Radio Emma Toc. So fast forward a couple of years, the project still carries on, celebrating 2MT. We have some ideas about doing something next year, which will be the centenary of 2MT. But we didn't really think we'd do much between the 95th anniversary and the centenary next year. But then, as we all know, beginning of last year, this horrible thing happened and lockdown came and affected us all. And suddenly I was left with a lot of time on my hands. And I started tuning around shortwave bands again and thought, well, I've got time to start producing a program again. So we thought, well, let's see if we can do a short program called the Radio Emma Toc World Service and raise awareness of 2MT, but also try and create a program probably in the old style of shortwave programs, which are friendly, promote friendship between listeners, and just make a fun program that goes out on shortwave. The initial intention, I approached the relay stations again and got a very good response. So we started, I think it was back in May, our first program with the Radio Emma Toc World Service, a small 30-minute program. So just to start, to tell you how I make the program, very basic, very simple. I record the links using a very old microphone, still using a mix that I've been using for 20 years. And that then feeds into, if you look at the center of the picture there, a small handheld recorder, a Tascam recorder. Actually, I don't need the microphone or the mixer. I could do all of this with the small handheld recorder, but the microphone and the mixer give me a chance to slightly tweak the quality of the audio. So the vocals are all recorded on the recorder there. Then I come downstairs and to my radio room downstairs and put the whole program together on a very good program called Audacity, which means I can crossfade and join music and vocals and recordings together. This shows the opening of the program, then the vocals coming in. So very, very useful program to be able to put things together. I guess back in the day, I would have had to do it all live and record it as a full 30-minute program. But it tends to be easier now using this type of technology. And this is the room I'm sitting in now, which is the room that where my main computer is, and I put the whole thing together. So onto the relay stations. we've got various relay stations, and in no particular order. Let's start closer to home in Europe. Our program goes out on channel 292, run by a chap called Rainer. He has 3 transmitters. We use 2 of those transmitters, 6070 and 9670 kilohertz. And I understand, I believe they're 10 kilowatt transmitters. So that gives us very good coverage over Europe. In fact, our program this morning went out at 9 o'clock this morning on 6070 kilohertz. And I was using some online SDR receivers, and I could hear the program coming in very well in Switzerland, I think up in Norway, over in Russia. So Rainer's transmitters have very good coverage on 6070, and on 9670 it also has some directional capabilities. So our program does get out very well on channel 292. Another station we're relayed on is a small low power FM station in Tawa, New Zealand. And obviously the transmitter power there is very low. But what's interesting about World FM is it's also available online, and it has very global programming. So it's actually a very good station to tune into, carries some very international global programming. So quite pleased to be going out on World FM, but it's mostly for online listenership. For a while, we were going out on a unique radio in Australia, a small licensed shortwave radio station from Gunnedah in New South Wales on 5045 and 3210. That's currently off the air because Tim, who owns the station, has moved house, he's relocated, and he has to wait for his new licensing to come through. So, and from those, probably to the most powerful of our relay stations, WRMI. And I believe Jeff's watching now, so I better make sure I get the information right here. So WRMI, Radio Miami International, from the wonderfully named Okeechobee in Florida. I love that name. I don't know why, but it has become one of the places on our bucket list to go and visit one day. I think WRMI must be the only station that has cows wandering around its transmission site. I understand it's a 600-acre transmission site, and there are also crocodiles wandering around as well. So that might put me off visiting, I think, but I'm okay with the cows, but not the crocodiles. Here's a picture of Jeff. Hello, Jeff, in the control room at WRMI. And I'm just going to read to make sure I get the information right. This picture shows Jeff in the main control room. The station was originally operated by WYFR, set up in 1977. And the station was purchased by WRMI in 2013 and has 14 transmitters and 23 antennas beamed in 11 different directions across the world. Many of the transmitters are 100 kilowatts and cover various of the shortwave bands. And obviously it goes without saying that we get very good coverage from our program going out on WRMI. And I will come on to that a bit later. But I'm very grateful that Jeff puts programs like mine. I've noticed Bryce is watching as well. So the amazing Encore program, the classical music program, really, it's very good for people like us. I'm happy to call myself an enthusiast, a hobbyist. To have our programs put out on a station like WRMI is actually quite a real honor. So I'm grateful for that, very grateful for that. And just onto our last relay station and going almost from one extreme to another. Scandinavian Weekend Radio, whose transmitters are probably 100 watts rather than 100 kilowatts. But a wonderful set of people who run Scandinavian Weekend Radio. They transmit on the first Saturday of every month, I think on 9 or 10 months of the year, from Virat in Finland. And we get good responses from there as well. They're, again, I've never actually met any of them, but I understand they're a bunch of radio enthusiasts like myself. This is the hut they transmit from. And I believe, and I'm not sure, but Chris, you have to give me a thumbs up if I'm right here. I believe the EDXC visited the hut a few years ago. Is that right? Did EDXC come in to visit that hut? And I have seen a picture somewhere of you outside the hut, but I think the weather was a bit different then. This picture was taken last month. So obviously it shows the dedication of us radio people to put our programs out, because they've made their way to their hut to do their programming. So that's our relay stations. Just a quick picture of our listening post here. This is literally just in front of me here. I try and tune into our programs on my ICOM IC718, tuned into Jeff's frequency there, WRMI, which I can get here sometimes. It's not beamed over to here, but I can get that sometimes. And I can get some of his other frequencies as well. The little rig on top is a amateur radio transceiver, 2 meters 70 sems. Also is a wideband receive, so I use that as a scanner as well. So that's how we're listening here. Just a few of our QSL cards that we send out. We do get a lot of reception reports in. The first program back in May, we had over 30 reception reports, which I think is very, very good. I'm very pleased with that. Last month, we had over 40 reception reports coming in. So I'll try and produce some different QSLs every now and then, so that always send out something that lists people's names and where they're listening, and just a few others, just to try and give people interest in what we're producing and sending out. We have trialed a couple of music programs. I have an extremely strange taste in music, in that I like vintage music from the 1930s, and I also like modern electronic dance music. So don't ask me why, I just like it. So we've tried different music programs just to see how they what response we get. We got a good response for the trance music program, and we also have had a good response to what's going out this month, which is a program called The Wireless Years, which is vintage music. So Glenn Miller, Burt Camford, James Last, Andrew's Sisters, that sort of thing. We also produced a special QSL for our February program that we did for Channel 292 on their birthday. We did a 1-hour compilation program, and it was nice to, they donated airtime to stations over the day that they were 10 years old, 1st of February. So that was nice. Let's have a look. This is this month's QSL, which combines the two. So the World Service program is a half-hour program, but sometimes we have an hour's programming scheduled slot. So this month we've also then got a half-hour vintage music program coming in. Yeah, I mentioned listening on SDRs, and so a few weeks ago, I was sat in the shack in the radio room here, and I realised that the program is going out on one of Jeff's transmitters on WRMI on 5950. So I thought, well, let's have a tune around and see what we can find. So I went on to the online SDRs and tuned into one in North Carolina, and was really pleased and amazed to see how strong the signal was from 5950. It's booming in there on this SDR waterfall, and so easy to receive here. And as my geography is not very good, my geography knowledge, I then went on to Google and thought, well, how far is North Carolina from Okeechobee? And it's 700 miles away. And so for the signal to be reaching North Carolina with that strength was extremely good. Carried on searching around SDRs, went a bit further afield to Wisconsin, and again, a very respectable signal there on 5950 on the waterfall. And again, checking the distance, 1,400 miles. I have to say, I'm quite pleased that I'm still amazed at that the signal is actually reaching that distance. If you remember, I talked about operating a community radio station. We had 15 watts of power on FM, really covering a 5-mile radius. I know that our signal, that our program is beamed on a signal that is easily traveling 1,400 miles. Is fantastic. And we have had good reports in from South America. Some of Jeff's transmitters are beamed at South America. And some unusual reports. We had a report in from a chap who was the master of a vessel traveling in the Pacific, and he had actually rigged up an aerial system on the top deck of the vessel and was doing some shortwave DXing and he sent us a reception report. So for little old me doing a program, that's quite fascinating. I think I ought to maybe bring this talk to an end. I can carry on, but I'll bring it to an end, and then I'll let Chrissy advise if I can carry on. I mentioned in my last program about when we were talking about World Radio Day. It was interesting. There's a flippant side for me doing my program, but there's also a serious side. I tend to treat life in a flippant manner, but I do have a serious side to me. What I found, World Radio Day was very good for me because it made me look at radio again. When you think how much competition has been there to try and a lot of mediums might not have survived. You think television should have wiped radio out, but it didn't. And now the internet and all the social media that go with it should have done for radio, but it hasn't. And I think we take radio for granted sometimes. In a previous World Radio Day, Farm Radio International asked their colleagues to answer the question or finish the sentence, radio is. And I loved some of the answers. Radio is life, change, peace, fantastic, dynamic. Radio is your only way of reaching the hard to reach. Very good. That personal, intimate, and a lifeline. Radio is an amazing tool. Radio is you. I was quite touched by that because I think we do tend to take radio for granted. And I went on to say that I agree with all those sentiments. And it was good to be able to thank World Radio Day for reminding us just how valuable our radio is. And hopefully we all share a similar pride, whether we be a program maker, a transmission supplier, or above all, which is where I started, a listener. Because without the listener, there's no point me making a program. There's no point anyone putting a transmitter on the air. So listeners are the key and the most important thing. So I hope that my as I say, I tend to be quite flippant, but there is a serious side to this. And I hope that just in a small way, that my little program and others like me provide some sort of balance to some of the more serious and the more intense programs that are on shortwave, and in a small way will help to keep people tuning in and listening to shortwave. I think in the communication magazine last month, very interesting, there was an article by David Harris about new radio stations coming on the air, and the editorial comment at the end of that picked up on the point that some of us do like to tune around and hear different things. And shortwave is an amazing place for that. You can tune around, you can hear different cultures, different slants on news, different music. And that's just on the broadcast side. There's all these fascinating bits in between that number stations and data signals that are fascinating. So I like to feel that we're all keeping shortwave alive, and I think it will still be needed. Recent events have shown that the internet can't be relied on to relay information and news to certain parts of the world. So even if there is internet worldwide, it's still controlled by someone else. So we do need radio, and we desperately need shortwave radio. And I think in time, people will start to realize again how valuable shortwave is. So that, I think I'll finish another little something to add in for about 3 or 4 minutes if you want that, but I'm conscious that I've been talking for a while, and perhaps I need a glass of water, and I'll hand it back to Chrissy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jim. That was really fascinating, and I've been a big fan of your programs as they've evolved through the years, although I must admit I cheat a little bit and listen online, but it's another listener, I suppose. So yeah, that was really, really useful. If people can feel free to unmute now, and if they've got any questions for Jim, we can do that, and then we'll go on to Ronald's presentation. So does anyone have any questions for Jim? Just unmute people.
Chrissy, no questions, but that was a fascinating presentation. Thank you very much.
All right.
This is Bill Tilford in Chicago, United States. Hi, Jim. Congrats.
I'm a programmer myself. I use stations in the US, Germany, and Bulgaria. I have a question. I've been trying to affordably reach the subcontinent, given to what should be a huge number of listeners there. And almost every option I've tried, if I go on remote SDRs in the region, there's static, even though the signals sometimes jump right over them in other parts of South Asia. Have you had any experience with, and by subcontinent, I'm referring to Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. Have you had any experience penetrating that area with your program? And what are your thoughts about that?
Okay, yeah, okay, Bill. Yeah, I recognise your name. So yeah, hello, nice to see you there. In a word, no, I do get reports in from India and Pakistan, but I'm afraid they're for online listening. But I did have one report in where someone had managed to just make out one of our relays over channel 292 on 9670 kilohertz. I've got a feeling though, I've got a feeling that maybe we have had a report in at some time where someone has heard us on Jeff's WRMI. Whether that was on 9955 or not, I don't know. It probably was because we're only on a couple of his frequencies. So I think we have, but I would have to say it was probably more of an enthusiast's response rather than someone who would be able to regularly listen and enjoy the program. So I hope you don't mind me sort of differentiating between the two. Obviously, we all listen for different reasons. And
well, no, we have one thing in common, which is we program a lot of music. You know, hopefully people are doing more than getting us as a DX catch. So, but
yeah, for me, I'm happy with both. But yes, I love the fact that people are getting the program and tuning in. Sure. And from far remote places, but yeah, I guess I would also like to say I hope people listen to the program and maybe use online as a backup to listen to the program, because I spend ages trying to tweak it and make sure there's no clicks and gaps in it, so which wouldn't matter on some short, but you know, it's so hopefully people will listen online. But no, I'm afraid I can't give you any answers there. I can see Jeff is here, so I'm sure Jeff will come in a bit later and say if there's any options for that, but I haven't got the answer, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I've had like maybe one report a year out of the region. It's weird. I get more reports out of say Japan and China during the year than I do out of there. Yeah, it's a puzzle.
Yeah, I was going to say there are very active listeners in India and Pakistan and Japan. Those three areas I've had reports in from there, but a lot of them are people now using the SDRs to listen, so they're not listening to it directly at the end of a transmission. So yeah, and from my point of view, there's nothing wrong with that, really. You know, SDRs have become part of the ecosystem. So. Yeah. All right, thanks. That's interesting. Okay.
Okay, thanks everyone. I think we should now move to Ronald's presentation, and then if we have time afterwards, we can, if there's any more questions or comments on Jim's, we can add them in then. So Ronald, you should be able to share your screen if you wish to.
I'm using an iPhone because the microphone on my desktop doesn't work. So let me see. I can see you and I can see myself. Down at the bottom it says mute. Let me see. Mute show video. Participants. Can you share my screen?
Let me just look.
Because during the previous presentation, I could see the speaker.
I can.
And not anybody else.
Right. I can temporarily make you the host and then you can pass that back if that's the way to do it.
Fantastic. Sure.
Do that?
You know better than I do.
Well, let's try that, and afterwards you'll have to make me the host again. Let's try that.
Now you're taking a risk.
Wow, I know. What about now? Europe is handed over to the USA. I'm not sure if that's the best.
So can everyone see me and hear me?
Yep.
Everything's okay? Well, first of all, I want to congratulate the previous speaker. His talk was absolutely fantastic. I made notes. I learned an enormous amount because, as you'll soon find out, I really have not been doing any shortwave listening for a number of decades. So that talk was absolutely fantastic. Every minute I just hung on every word. But I have to make a comment. I live in West Palm Beach, Florida, and I'm about 40 miles east of Okeechobee. And that's where WRMI's transmitters are located. I'm also about less than a mile from Okeechobee Boulevard, which is the main street in West Palm Beach, Florida. Of course, like many other names in Florida, they're indigenous names. What's interesting, I've seen this in other parts of the world. You'll have an indigenous population that's colonized, but the colonizers keep the indigenous names. And there's Seminole names all over the state of Florida, from Tallahassee to Okeechobee, and they stayed. They have remained, even though there was first the French, then the Spanish, then the English, and now it's part of the United States. So I had to get those things out right away. So the reason I'm talking to you today is because of a book that I wrote and published recently. The title is QSL, How I Traveled the World and Never Left Home. So in my own case, I started DXing in October 1955. I was a teenager and attending junior high school at the time. And I was thinking, how did I get into that? How did I start listening to shortwave? It was an outgrowth of stamp collecting. I had been a stamp collector for many, many years. And I have always recommended stamp collecting philately to anybody, particularly children. I don't know what it's like today, but I'm sure a lot of you know that you can learn so much from stamp collecting. I learned about politics, I learned about economics, I learned about geography, I learned about history, inflation, any subject you can think of is in stamp collecting. So we had a Crosley console in our living room that was pre-TV, and it had shortwave bands on it, as all the radios did in the 30s and 40s. So I started picking up these strange stations. Where are all these? They were from foreign countries. I thought, wow, this is really interesting. And so then I really started getting into that on this old Crosley, and I decided I wanted a shortwave receiver. And I asked my parents if they would get me one. And they said, well, they bribed me. They said, well, we'll do it, but you have to take this. This shows you how intelligent they were. You have to take a summer course in typing at the local business school. I don't want to do that. I don't need to learn how to type. No, that's the deal. Either you learn how to type or you don't get the radio. So I learned how to type 60 words a minute. And that several decades later got me a job on Capitol Hill. I walked into the congressman's office. He said, Ron, do you know how to type? I said, sure, I can type 60 words a minute. He says, go to that typewriter, IBM Selectric, and type up your resume. And so I got hired because I knew how to type 60 words a minute. So I started sending out reception reports, and my first QSL card was from NRK, Norway, and it was dated February the 24th, 1956. So that was my first QSL card. I saved my cards, and what happened was my Radio Shack, if you want to call it that, was over the garage that was next to our house, but the roofs were tilted. And when I started getting these QSL cards, I couldn't stick them on the wall. That wouldn't work. So I put them in a steel box. I just put them, each QSL, I put them in alphabetical order, put them in a steel box. And that box, and so I DX'd from 1955 through around 1960, the early 1960s, because I went to University of Michigan in the fall of 1959, and obviously other things were on my mind, but I would continue DXing during school holidays. But then after I relocated to Europe in 1967, then that was the end, and I didn't DX again until I got a Barlow Wadley many years later. So what happened was I found the box. The box was put in my possessions and put into storage in Washington, D.C. I found the box in 2019, and I've been writing books since 2012. That's all I do. That's what I do. And with the pandemic, I spend a lot of time every day on the computer writing my books. So I thought, wait a minute, these cards are in perfect condition. Maybe I could do something with them, maybe do a book. Why not? So I thought, well, maybe somebody's already done it. So I went on the internet, QSL book and album, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I found, and you can find lots of QSL archives, and we all know about this. Some of them are enormously well stocked. It's wonderful to go through those cards. But as far as I could figure, no book had been done. No book had ever been published anywhere with color illustrations of QSL cards. So I said, okay, I'm going to do it. And so I scanned them all. Now, remember, these are vintage cards dating from 1956 to the early 1960s. So I scanned them all. And I also had in that steel box, I had some radio amateur QSL cards. And in those days, a lot of SWLers would exchange SWL cards. So some people were jealous. You know, the radio amateurs had their call sign, but we were listeners and we didn't have a call sign. And so as I wrote in the introduction to the book, there was a gentleman in Cleveland, Ohio, who was unofficially issuing SWL IDs to anybody who wrote. So I put a reproduction of the postcard that he sent me with my genuine Shortwave listeners ID card. And so that was something that, because it was really active in those days, it was a really big hobby. And particularly there was the newest radio club, of which I was a member. That was the largest club in America, and they had a big bulletin they sent out on a regular basis. And of course, we had our statistics, how many stations you'd logged, so. Unfortunately, I don't have those bulletins, but they are archived and they are accessible. Next thing, so the book. So what about the book? So first of all, I scanned all the QSL cards. Then I thought, wait a minute, I've got some more cards. I got these amateur cards and I've got the shortwave listener cards. So I scanned those too. And then I looked again and I had some greeting cards from some of these stations. Radio Prague was one, Radio Warsaw, a lot from Eastern Europe, Radio Japan, NHK. And so I scanned those. So I had a lot of stuff. And so I put the book together, and this is what it consists of. There's an introduction, about 17 pages, and I wanted it to be comprehensible to somebody who got the book as a gift, or somebody who didn't know anything about shortwave radio, who knew nothing. But I also wanted it to be at least of some interest to shortwave listeners and people who know about radio and who are radio enthusiasts and amateurs. I wanted to appeal to both, to a wide spectrum of readers, not restricted to one group or another. I tried to make it interesting. And so there's some stuff in there. I reproduced a letter I got from Swan Radio, which was a pirate, or not a pirate, I guess you'd call it a clandestine station operated by the CIA on Swan Island, which at that time was disputed. It was uninhabited, but it was disputed between the United States and Nicaragua. And it operated under the identity of the Gibraltar Steamship Company in New York. That was its pseudonym, nom de guerre or whatever. And so I reproduced in the book my QSL letter from Swan Radio. And there's a fantastic history of that station. And I gave the URL in the book. It's a really long and very scholarly essay about the whole history of Swan Radio. It was published in a scholarly journal. And that's that the URL of the article is in the book. So that was the first section. And then the next three sections are the illustrations. So the first section is all the QSL cards. There are over 100 of them from around 80 countries. The statistics are in the book. But one thing I did, and I thought might be interesting, is in many cases, I scanned the front and the back of the QSL card. So people could see what was written. They could see the dates of the reception that I had received. And of course, they all were addressed to my home in Kentucky. And I wondered, somebody's going to buy that book and is going to write me a letter to Kentucky. And they're going to get, what's this all about? So I actually contacted the current residents of the house I lived in, and I alerted them. I said, I published this book. You may get a letter. Here's my current address. Will you do me the kindness of forwarding the letter if you get any? So they were very cool. In fact, they bought a copy of the book, which I didn't ask them to. They said, oh, that sounds interesting. We'll buy the book. So they can see their address in the book. So that's the three sections. Then the last section is an appendix called A Letter from Antarctica. And this is another, it's an incredible story that when I wrote the book, had a beginning and a middle. And after I published the book, it has an end. So to summarize the story, so I was DXing. One day I got a letter in the mail with stamps on it from the Falkland Islands dependencies, no return address. I thought, well, I don't know anybody in any of those places. What's this all about? It was from a meteorologist at Base W in who was working for the British Transantarctica expedition. His name was John Thorne. He wrote me a two-page letter describing what was going on in Antarctica, what they were doing. The team of 10, they had dogs that they had to take care of. It was a fascinating letter, but he said, don't write me back because the ship's coming in early 1958 or 59, I can't remember, and I'll be back in England, and then I don't know where I'm going to be. So I found that. I found that too. I found the letter, and I thought, well, let's see what that's all about. And so and how did he get my address? That was the point. How did he get my address? Apparently, I had written a letter to Radio Sarandí in Montevideo. They had an English language service at the time. And the compere of the English language service apparently read my letter and gave my address. And I didn't hear the broadcast, but John Thorne did. So that's how he found my address in Kentucky and sent me the letter. So I thought, well, now it's 2020. This is 2020. What can I find out to this story? Because it ended abruptly. And so I started researching, and that's one of the things the internet is good for. You can find almost anything. And I tracked down John Thorne in the UK. And I corresponded. I sent a letter, and it was answered by his wife, Val. This was back in November, December 2020. And John was by that time 92 years old, and he had been ailing at that time. But she read my letter to John, and then she wrote me back, and I said, okay, I'm going to send you a copy of the book. That's the least thing I can do. And so I did that. So I published that information as an appendix to the book and left it there. The last thing I wrote was that there is a naming commission in the UK, and they named a geographical point in Antarctica after John Thorne. It's called Thorne Point, Antarctica. You can look it up. And so I ended the book with that. You know, how many of us can boast that we had a landmark named after us? Not many. And then after I started corresponding with Chrissy, and thank you so much for your kind review of the book, I learned from Val that John Thorne had passed away on January 7th, 2021. And I was able to attend remotely the funeral service on the internet in January the, I don't have any of the 21st, something, it was in January. So that was the end to the story that had begun in the late 1950s. And it's if I do a second revised version of the book, I'll be certain to include that information in the appendix. So last thing is how to get the book. Since it was published by Kindle Direct Publishing, which is a division of Amazon, it's currently available on all 16 Amazon websites worldwide, 16 countries. And and I sent Chrissy, or I'll send it to anyone who wishes. I have a table and I created short links for all those countries. So if you're in India and you want to buy the book in rupees, you can do it. So far, one person in Japan bought the book and paid for it in yen. So it's really available worldwide. It's 160 pages, and it's a tad more expensive than I wanted, but I was under a constriction under KDP. They impose a minimum retail price, which covers their cost, paper, binding, ink, taxes, overhead, et cetera, and then they suggest a minimum royalty that the author can receive. So that's more or less what I did. I couldn't have sold it for $1, but it's 160 pages and over 100 are in full color. All the QSL cards are in full color. And some of the greeting cards are rather unusual. One of them is a beautiful card from Radio Warsaw of a mother and child that was sent out at Christmas. And another one that some people commented on, it's a black and white card of a May Day demonstration in Prague that was sent by Radio Prague. And you can see close-ups of those people with their holding their cards, their Mayday placards. And so that's another aspect of the politics of shortwave that I haven't really gone into very much in this talk, but we all know the significance of politics. You can't really separate shortwave from politics, certainly not in when I was DXing, because it was the Cold War. And I remember jamming, people of my age who were DXing in those days. We knew about jamming, and it was pervasive. It was pervasive in the countries of Eastern Europe. But as I wrote in the book, it was possible. They put the jamming stations near the big cities, so that would prevent a lot of people in Warsaw or Prague or Sofia from getting the BBC or the VOA or Radio Free Europe. All those stations were jammed, but people out in the countryside, they could often pick up those stations. So they had to be careful that they weren't denounced, but they often could get those broadcasts. That's why they kept them going. They never closed RFE. RFE is still in existence. Radio Liberty is still in existence. So that's an aspect of shortwave that we all know. And I discussed it to a certain extent, but not fully. It deserves a full treatment, the whole aspect of how the Cold War was waged over shortwave. About the future of shortwave, I was so interested in what's happening now, particularly since I'm a neighbor of WRMI, but I wanted to mention an article published by Thomas Witherspoon, whom many of you know, and it was in an edition of the World Radio Handbook several years ago, not the most recent one, but he wrote an essay called The Future of Shortwave. And that was extremely interesting. That was interesting to me to see what was going on and what he thought might be going on in the future. And I thought that, and others know much, much more than I do, but I was thinking that today, probably shortwave is probably still quite useful in the Pacific Ocean, Oceania, and in perhaps remote parts of Latin America, like in Amazonia, or in remote parts of Africa, where people might not have internet access. And so I was thinking, and others know much more about this, but that was my thought. When I read this article, I thought, yeah, right, people in Tahiti or in the Salmon Islands, they might still be listening to shortwave today because they have big distances, a disparate population. And so that's, and maybe they can't get internet. So I thought there is still a valid function for shortwave in some parts of the world, but I stand to be corrected for that. You others know much more than I do. So that's all for now. I'd be glad to take any question. I'll answer them to the best of my ability. And I want to thank you all for listening. And particularly, I want to thank Chrissy for giving me the chance to talk about my book.
Pleasure. Thank you very much. I mean, that was really interesting. And yeah, I've been fortunate enough to look at the book and read it, and there's lots of information there, great color photos. I'm surprised no one has thought of publishing parts of their QSL collection before now. I know there's one of the DX clubs in Germany produces a calendar with QSLs in, which is lovely too. But yeah, do show us the book, Ronald, and then if anyone.
Yes, I will. There it is.
Fantastic.
And the QSL on the cover from Emissora Nacional in Lisbon, when I was going through the cards, that's the perfect cover photo. That's an image of shortwave radio. They really did it right. And if you look at it closely, and it's maybe hard to see, but they put lines from Lisbon to almost all of their colonies and former colonies, including Brazil. But it's all very discreet. You have to look closely because a lot of their colonies were small. Goa was small, Macau was small, but they put a line to Macau. And they had a big empire. It wasn't as big as the British Empire or the French colonial empire, but it was very widespread. The Portuguese were great navigators, and their national epic is the Lusíads, which mythifies Vasco da Gama. It's an epic poem about Vasco da Gama, who circumnavigated the globe. So I thought that QSL card was the perfect cover photo. I was just so happy that I had it, showing a map of the world, and it even has the letters QSL on the card. So you see that on the cover photo there. It has Radio Nacional, Emisora Nacional, and then it has QSL in red. So I thought that was perfection. That was absolute perfection.
Yes, serendipity. Okay.
Serendipity was.
We've got about 15 minutes left. So if anyone's got any questions for Ron or Jim, or I'd just like to open it up for general discussion and chat about all things radio, really. And if anyone else has got any comments, feel free to join in.
Oh, I have to send it back to you.
Okay. Yep. No, I set it up like that. I wasn't sure if you needed to.
All right. So you're the host now, right?
Not yet, but you need to. Yes, you're still the host at the moment. So I think you can click on the small dots to the right of my window and then make me the host.
Oh, wait a minute.
But in the meantime, has anyone else got anything they wish to comment on or join in with? Any questions or observations?
Is it Toshid speaking?
Hi, Toshid.
Jeff White is on the screen, so please tell him to say something from WRMY.
Hi, Toshi. How are you? Good to see you. It's very, very interesting presentations. I appreciate it. I unfortunately wasn't able to take part in the first Zoom meeting, but this was nice. And I want to invite Ron to come about an hour and 10 minutes up the road and visit us here in Okeechobee anytime.
Yay! Get the date. Absolutely. Oh, absolutely.
Actually, we stopped doing public tours of the station last year, because of the COVID thing and all that. But you can come anytime.
Tell me your name again.
Jeff White.
Okay.
And you can find us. WRMI.net has the address, and it's a little over an hour from where you are, I think.
Oh, I'm looking forward to that. I'm really looking forward to that. Thank you.
Anytime. I see so many names here, people I know and would like to talk to and all that. And I would really like to get to an EDXC meeting again. We have scheduled the HFCC conference in Sofia, Bulgaria in August, last week in August. I wish it was a little bit closer to your September 17th meeting, but it's, just like the EDXC conference this year, HFCC is still up in the air. We don't know what the situation is going to be like. I know right now, Americans in general cannot enter Bulgaria, so that's not a good sign. Although most Europeans, I think, can. But if people get vaccinations and things, I just got the shot a week ago, so the Johnson & Johnson, so I'm done.
Mm.
So then maybe people will be able to travel more.
Yeah, well, it would be great to think that if the HFCC meeting in Sofia can go ahead, and then the EDXC a couple of weeks later in Bucharest, that would, and they are so close. You've got to stay on and come to both, Jeff.
Well, I really like the one in Bratislava, because the HFCC ended and then the EDXC began like the same day, and so between Bratislava and Vienna, that was a great coincidence of meetings there. It'd be nice to be able to do that sort of thing again.
It almost looks like we've done it again. I mean, so Romania and Bulgaria, at least they're neighbouring countries. That's something.
Yeah.
So the HFCC has been meeting online for the past year, presumably.
That's right. We had an online meeting just last month. It was supposed to be in Tunisia, where the Arab States Broadcasting Union is headquartered. And then the one before that was supposed to be Sofia in B20, August of last year. And it was postponed until this year. And I don't know, it may be postponed until next year again. We'll see what happens. But hopefully things will improve over the coming months. But it's difficult because people will still be, have trouble traveling and airline schedules, and all that sort of thing. So we don't know what's going to happen.
I know, and there's also, I think even if we're allowed to travel, there may be some people that feel uneasy about traveling, and it would be straightforward if it was a group of people from one country going to another country, but when it's so international, which of course is one of the wonderful things about all of this, but it also makes it more complicated to meet up in groups, because each country, like you were saying, if Bulgaria isn't allowing US citizens in, there may be other combinations of restrictions. It's like a kind of, instead of the Cold War, it's like the COVID war, isn't it? It's a real. So does anyone?
I really like Jim's presentation too. Of course, it's a pleasure for us to have Radio Emma Toc on WRMI, and we get all kinds of response to that, and to Encore also, Hunter Bryce.
Can I just send greetings to Jeff, and I also recognise quite a few of the names on the screens. Can I suggest that the EDXC meet maybe in 2025 in Okeechobee?
Yeah.
And can I just
interrupt
as well? Sorry, Jeff. Just along with Jim to say how very much we appreciate and what an honour it is to be broadcast by WRMI, and for the support that you give us and generosity of airtime. Very much appreciated.
Well, it's amazing, how positive the response is from shortwave listeners to classical music on shortwave. A lot of people used to say classical music on shortwave is crazy, but people love it.
Yeah, who'd have thought?
Ronald, can you try and make me
Oh,
a host again?
I just don't know. I can't figure out how to do it. Let me see. Let me see.
There
Tap
should
OK.
also be a notification.
Oh, wait a minute. Tap OK. Just a minute. I really apologize. I can't find it. What? Oh, there.
I think if you go up to the window where I am, and the three dots to the right, click on that, and you should then be able to make me the host.
I can't find. I don't see three dots. That's the problem.
There's Alan here.
Oh, here. Wait a minute.
Ronald,
More. I got it. Ray
on
says
the
here
iPhone.
to report the cloud chat meeting. Disconnect audio. Oh, disconnect audio.
No, well, you should have a participant list. So you've tapped.
Raise
you've
hand
tapped-
security. Record to
if
the
you-
cloud chat
yeah,
meeting
if you go to your
settings.
participant list. Ronald, and you should see Chris's name. If you tap her name, you
Oh,
should then have the option to make her host.
got it. Let me do that. I just tapped it.
Then you should get an option to make host.
Do you see the options?
Try that again.
More, 3 dots, more. Raise hand, security, chat, meeting settings, minimize meeting, disconnect auto, cancel. Disconnect audio, maybe.
No, if you go to the, I think it's at the bottom of your screen, you should have a participants list. If you tap that, you should see the names of all the participants in your in the meeting.
Participants list.
Yep.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, so find Chris's
And-
name.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, then tap Chris's name.
Yep.
Now you should have an
Make
option.
host.
Make host. That's it.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want to change his? Okay, we're good. Thanks.
Right.
So-
That's great.
That's a relief.
Thank you. Okay, and I'm just, Risto is joining us. I know he was only, he wasn't sure of his availability, so he's joining us now. Anyone else got anything they want to add or discuss?
Chrissy, one thing that was talked about at the Winter SWL Fest, which probably everybody on here knows was done virtually this year. The thing that was talked about was even if they hold an in-person SWL Fest next year, to do it as much as they can in Zoom, so that people who would not ordinarily be able to attend the conference in person would be able to take advantage of all the programs and discussions and really be a part of the conference. EDXC might want to think about doing that as a way to expand its reach. I mean, the 2 speakers we had today were fantastic, and were it not for EDXC, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to hear them. So please think about that for the next EDXC conference.
I think we sort of touched upon that at our first meeting, which was more of a general discussion and chat rather than having speakers. But I think the pandemic has shown us, or has fast-tracked us all into more use of video conferencing, which perhaps would have taken another 5 years to all get to this stage otherwise. Yeah, and definitely the opportunity for people to give presentations or attend via Zoom is very good. Although I would be slightly concerned if people, if it was just me in a room, me and Christian in a room in Bucharest and everybody else was at home. But yeah, absolutely, expanding opportunities for people to join in is fantastic. I've always wanted to get to the Winterfest, but this year gave me a chance to join online. So yeah, I think it's a really exciting prospect for people who aren't able to travel or for whatever reasons to certainly run parallel sessions or some of the sessions in Zoom. We're doing it with a local community group where I live. A lot of people we've all gone online on Zoom, and even when we can meet up locally, some people prefer not to go out in the evenings, but would like to join on Zoom. So I think that's definitely a way forward. I wish I'd got shares in Zoom. So yeah, we'll definitely consider that for the EDX.
Thanks very much for organizing this.
Does anyone else want to comment? Have anything to add? Hi, Risto. Glad you're here. Apologies for not letting you in when you arrived.
Okay, sorry for joining you a little bit late, but can you hear me well?
Yes, can hear you.
Okay, but nice to be back here and see you all friends there. Take care.
So I think the plan will be to have another meeting like this for the EDXC in a few months' time, perhaps in July or the Northern Hemisphere summer to have a meeting like this. And we'll, at the EDXC website, we'll give updates and send emails out to members about the conference if we can go ahead with that. I don't think we're in a position to confirm that for a couple of months, and it does depend on Romania, but it would be great if it does go ahead, because we have been, Christian has worked out with Radio Romania International that we can visit them on the Friday afternoon. That would be the plan. So that would be great. One of the few big international radio stations, shortwave stations that's left. So that's a great opportunity if we can go ahead. So does anyone else wish to add anything?
Just one word. There's a Richard D'Angelo. Richard, would you make a couple of minutes report of the NASWA Zoom?
Sure, I can do that. We had about 240 people register for the virtual Winter SWL Festival. I believe Chrissy, you and Alan Rowe were among the participants. We had roughly between 160 and 175 attending any one session. We had about 8 or 9 sessions over 2 days, and the attendance varied for each session. And we were just fascinated with how many people attended. We did charge $5 for people who attend, mainly to recover our costs of buying the Zoom platform that we used. But then we had so many people register, we had a lot of money, so we gave out prizes, including a radio. I don't remember which radio, but we gave out a bunch of prizes. So economically, we didn't lose money, thankfully, and whatever's left over will go into the pot for hopefully an in-person fest. Terry brought up the subject of continuing using the Zoom platform in some respects, and we are looking into that. The difficulty, as Chrissy alluded to, is what happens if she's the only one who shows up in Bucharest. We have certain costs for using the hotel. We have to guarantee a certain number of rooms that will get people will use. We have to use the meeting room. So we have certain financial commitments. So if attendance would drop significantly overnight, we could have a serious problem there. So that's one of the tricky aspects to work into this. And until you do it, you just don't know. So I think we'll, do something next year using the Zoom platform. It might be a little limited because, certain things are going to be hard to do. As I'm sure the EDXC conference experiences, the in-person people gathering to talk, that's going to be hard to capture on Zoom, that kind of informality. That changes if someone sticks a camera in someone's face immediately. So we'll have to play it by ear and learn as we do it. But we are hoping to have some virtual aspect for the Winter SWL Festival next year, which I believe is the first weekend in March next year. So, we'll learn as we do it. But this year gave us great promise on how the platform works. And we're even thinking we could bring people who couldn't attend. We could have them do a presentation at the fest also if they can attend. So, it could work both ways. So we're pretty excited about those prospects. The problem is making the technical aspects work and the financial aspects. The first thing that comes to mind is we probably need 2 or 3 people who we don't have today, but who would have to run the Zoom platform, because our hosts of the fest, Rich Cuff and John Figliozzi, are working every moment of the fest when we do it in person, and they would not have time to operate any of the Zoom features. So we would need some new technical people to make that work. So those are some of the issues we're dealing with, but the plan is to try and do something next March to use the Zoom platform and see if we can make it work both on site and remotely.
Yeah, that sounds really promising, and I think we'll sort of go hand in hand and see how it works out for everybody, and I guess other DX meetings from other countries as well.
As Rich may know, I suggested that $5. I stole my participation in a 2-day conference at $5. The fee should have been $25 or $50 or something reasonable, because Rich makes a very good point, and that is, if I'm going to participate in the conference remotely, then I should pay part of the fixed costs for the hotel or the meeting room or whatever, just because that's what's fair, and it does provide a financial cushion for the conference organizers.
Yeah, I think we're just going to have to look at all the costs and the whys and the wherefores, but I think, yeah, it's an exciting prospect to allow people to get to conferences that they wouldn't normally attend and to participate and join in, just like we have this afternoon. But yeah, in person is always preferable, isn't it? So we've almost reached the time, but yeah, Bill, anyone else want to contribute to?
Yeah, I'd like to touch on a future shortwave thing. And I've been sliced into too many parts to really take this idea and seriously run with it yet. Although hopefully I'll reach a point in my life where I can. I'm guessing all of us, or most of us at least, started when we were pretty young. I was literally like 8 or 9 years old when I started listening. But I also had a radio TV course in high school. And as we look ahead at listener, hobbyist, and to some degree programmer demographics, we're getting grayer. And I wonder at times, given that there are still some radio TV programs, those of you in Europe, I'd like to pick your brain about that. Here in the US, we still have a fair amount of high school FM stations. And shortwave's a little bit different, but in an age where so much programming is getting thrown to the stations over the internet anyway, like I send my stuff off, and I'm sure that the other programmers here do the same. I send my stuff off in FTP files to the stations. There's really no reason why a radio TV course couldn't have a shortwave component now, where a class project would be to put together a special, even a 1-hour thing. And Ronald's presentation on QSLs actually perked my interest in that, because it touches on the theme of why shortwave is both cool and relevant. And I have a couple questions for the group. One, do students in parts of Europe get involved in radio courses when they're in some level of secondary school? And if not, are there other ways to reach them? Big picture, I think long-term sustainability includes getting people when they're young. And in the US, at least, there are some doors that in theory could be opened with the right packaging. So I guess my first questions to the Europeans in the group, are there communications courses in your secondary school systems there? Somewhere where people can do student radio or something like that?
I don't know.
Go ahead.
I'd say universities, certainly universities have there's a university radio network and opportunities there for broadcasters, but I'm unaware of anything in secondary schools myself.
Pretty, if I can come in here and say that a lot of our community radio stations are based on school premises and will also run classes or courses for, in particular, older students, so they get media training. And Bournemouth University does run an FM on-air radio station called, I think it's called Nerve FM, and they do that at least once a year. So we do actually have both the community radio stations and at least one university doing on-air training and broadcasting.
I think it would be kind of cool. This would probably mean a search for grant funding, but as is true with so many things. But I think it would be cool if there was something that could go into the secondary school systems, both here in the US and in other countries, with something that showed why shortwave was both relevant and fascinating to us when we were younger people. Actually, that QSL book is kind of a good pictorial, if you like, of why it can be fun. The reality of the internet being blocked is why it's still relevant. And there's a skill set. I mean, obviously they couldn't all drive to shortwave transmitters and get on the air live, but they could probably do the same thing that us adult programmers do as a one-time or two-time class project and put together an hour to get broadcast on a WBCQ or a WMRI or other stations. Given the cost of airtime has become affordable now, largely, you know, it's not out of the realm of possibility that a class could scrape together $100 or $200 for airtime for a one shot. I know if I were 16 years old today, I think it would be kind of fun to be on WMRI or WBCQ or Channel 292 in Germany as a one-shot deal. So the concept is simpler than it is easy. But
what role would amateur radio play in this? No one has mentioned that. What's the status of amateur radio today? And is that attracting younger people? I have no knowledge, but I throw the question out.
My view is I'm amateur radio ham as well. And for the 10 years I've been a radio ham, there's always been the constant question, how do we attract youngsters into the hobby? Partly I do sometimes answer that with the thing, I'm not necessarily, amateur radio is a great hobby for someone in middle and later stages of life, because maybe they've got more time and more money to spend on that hobby. But going back to Bill's questions about getting youngsters interested in shortwave radio, in my experience, most youngsters, it's difficult to get them interested in FM radio because obviously there are so many different competing mediums now. My take on it is that it's a case of explaining to people that the internet is not the be all and end all that they may think it is at the moment. And I think shortwave's time will come in the future again, because there will be times when the internet is not able to do what it's taken over now and what it's doing. So we have to keep shortwave alive. And there are other DRM or other systems, data transmission systems. Shortwave radiogram, it sends out data signals, and it's keeping that part of it alive. And I think that's where the future is, in the fact that internet is not what we all think it is. And we would have to go back to some of the more traditional systems. Radio has survived against television and the internet. I think shortwave radio will survive, but maybe it's not yet been, the other systems haven't been tested enough for shortwave to be able to jump back in and fill the gap, maybe.
I come in on with Bill and also you, Jim. Availability of shortwave radios. Where are they? You can't get hold of them.
Yeah. well, there's quite a few cheaper ones. In fact, Jeff had an interesting thing on Wavescan many months ago, where he was chatting with one of his colleagues about the availability of like sort of $8 or $9 shortwave radios somewhere, and I found that interesting. And actually, if you go on Amazon or eBay, there are some sort of £10. There's a £10 or £15 Texan radio, which is an old rotary control 9 shortwave band. So they are there. But I would also go in at a different angle and say to people, look, on your computer, have you looked at one of these SDRs? And have you tried tuning it? And what are you hearing? And actually, so go in using what they're using anyway, but introduce them to something else that they hadn't thought of. And then I'd make sure I found a number station for them to listen to, because that is there are fascinating bits in shortwave, outside of the normal broadcasting. So for me, it's alive and well. When I've demonstrated amateur radio days, sometimes I've given up with the amateur radio, and I've just said to a youngster, look, turn the dial and tell me what you hear. What's that language? What's that music? And they didn't know that was there. So there is still an interest, but we've got a long way to go.
Yeah, actually, as I'm listening to this, if there are a lot of people that are both amateur broadcasters and SWL people, there's also a divide where there are two different cultures that, for reasons I've never fully understood, sometimes have different perspectives on life. But in this context, reaching youngsters, it would actually be perfectly logical for the amateur and the SWL people to even consider teaming up as sort of a, label it what you will, alt radio spectrum, something that combined all of that, which might actually make it more manageable and attractive as a curriculum substance. Even those who would debate the relevance of broadcast SWL would be hard put to poo-poo the importance of amateur broadcasters, especially for things like natural disasters, for example. There could be a natural alliance there in theory. Another thing about the magic of turning a radio dial as opposed to looking on the internet. On the internet, you actually have to think to look at something. You have to punch in, say, Tirana, Albania in Google in order to go get your broadcast that way. You can't turn the dial like you can with the physical radio, or go to scan as you can on a web SDR. So you're never going to encounter a Tirana, Albania using internet searches by accident. Not going to happen. And I think part of the magic for all of us was probably bumping into something we weren't expecting to encounter. And again, I don't want to put opinions in everybody else's heads, but I know that was part of the magic for me. I'll dummy up on this for a while. If anybody wants to bat that idea back and forth some more, I'd be delighted. It's not going to turn into a formal proposal next week, but in a year or 5, who knows? I think it would involve both educators, broadcasters, and some other key people to be able to write a grant proposal or something. I know none of us are registered charities, and probably not too many millionaires in the group either. So, but I think my gut tells me that that's part of where the future is, getting back to getting people when they're young. Mind you, I love my 50+ listeners, but nobody's going to live forever, including me. So,
You know, Bill, one thing, and everyone, not just Bill, but what got me started in shortwave radio, articles in Boy's Life. They did a series of 3 articles. It was in 1959, I think. That's what got me interested. Like, wow, I can do all those things. I can hear all those countries. And of course, 1959, I was 13, and it'll sound funny, but impressionable. And so I thought that was the neatest thing in the world. And so my parents bought me a Hallicrafters S30AD for Christmas. You know, it was $49.95 from Sears. You know, that's back when Sears, Montgomery Ward, J.C. Penney's, all of those companies had shortwave radios. And so, you know, it was really easy with Boy's Life to be introduced to the hobby. Yes. And then it was just so darn easy to get a radio. And now, you know, well, I don't have to tell anybody, you know, those days are long over. But I just wonder, you know, the Scouts still have merit badge. I don't know. I guess they still have a merit badge for radio or something like that. You know, people who are involved in Scouts, maybe not just Boy Scouts, but Girl Scouts, or I guess now they're just all Scouts. It might be a way to plug into young people and see if there's not the possibility of reinvigorating, you know, those folks to listen, or let's, you know, well, it used to be long range reception on medium wave, which is almost impossible these days, thanks to all the urban noise and the frequency crowding. But that's something that lots of people, lots of young people can relate to right now, because, you know, they don't need any special equipment. They can just get in the car and tune the dial and find something from 500, 1,000 miles away or whatever. And I think if put in context, that, you know, that's a way for them to relate immediately. Well, what if you could hear England? What if you could hear Japan? You know, it's those international stations are just an extension of what they can do every day, sitting in their car and driving up and, you know, cruising Main Street. I guess they do that these days. I'm a little old for that. But, you know, what they do every day.
That's a great thought. You know, on the Scout angle too, you could even take the radio in a tent while you're out camping. So, and they wouldn't have our hang-ups about back in the day there were 60 more channels. You know, so.
One of the cards I got from an SWLer was from Alan Carey, age 11, member of the Boys Life Radio Club. And so this was back in 59 when you read those articles. So we had this young man in Massachusetts, age 11.
Ronald, if you haven't already done it, I would, Boys Life still publishes, although it probably has more web readers than paper. I'd encourage you to reach out to them about your book, just a thought. Especially if you have little snippets like that in it. You never know.
In what medium, in what venue?
No, Boys Life magazine.
Oh, Boys Life. Oh, yes,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they still publish. I'd encourage you to reach out to them about your
Oh,
book.
absolutely. That's a great idea, of course. Yeah, because you've got that's the readership that you want.
Yes.
You get them when they're young. And then even at my age, I'd like to get back to it. And why did I publish the book? I'd never lost my interest in shortwave radio. Maybe I wasn't doing it for many years, but I came back to it. It's something that you really get. You get it. And if you get these youngsters, that's the idea, to get them interested when they're young. And then they'll keep.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
Yeah, there was an article, there was a profile of Jerry Berg in that other magazine. There was this wonderful magazine that didn't last very long, DX Horizons or something like that. And he was, I think, 13 when they published the profile of Jerry Berg. And it had a picture of him with his radio equipment. And he's still in it. He's running this archive. So he's stayed with shortwave his entire life also. He wrote a very kind review about my book also.
Ron, you just showed yourself as an old timer by mentioning
I am.
DXing Horizons, because that is a long time ago.
Yes, it was a wonderful resource. For when I was writing the book. It was August Balby was another one they profiled.
Oh,
and, Sven Elfing, he was profiled. That was a wonder. Well, it's all archived. You can, it's accessible.
Yeah.
All those issues are archived, and I consulted them.
Well, I think I remember they had an article on Radio Swan in the DXing Horizons.
It might have.
It sticks in my mind because back then that was, I won't say it was the only magazine like that around, but it's the only one that I recall.
Mm-hmm. This is all coming on the heels to, I think it would be an exaggeration to say that we're having a mini renaissance of independent programming, but a lot of interesting independent programs have come on the air in the last 3 or 4 years, and not all of them musical. One of my pleasures during the week is a radio drama called Town Call Radio. That's an hour-long weekly radio drama with sound effects. And who thought we'd be seeing that again? I understand the Beeb is experimenting with comedy again, comedic news. Alan, I see you on screen. Hi, maybe you can speak to that for a moment. But there's stuff. There's not the, oh my God, it's all politics and religion factor. There's plenty of other stuff to listen. Jeff of WMRI, what's your take on all of this? Is this pie in the sky or Don Quixote, or do you think if someone came to you with I'm Guglielmo Marconi High School's radio TV director, I'd like to get an hour special on MRI. What would you think if you heard that?
Actually, it's happened. We had a guy in California. This is a few years ago now, who had a class, and they did a series of special programs. So it has happened. And in terms of independent programming in general, we get all kinds of inquiries, and I'm amazed. It's not dropping off. These are not, for the most part, big organizations with lots of money that want to buy a lot of time, but somebody who comes along and wants a weekly, half hour or an hour or something like that. In fact, I think I got two or three inquiries yesterday about a weekly 1 hour program. So, and it's like you say, all sorts of things. It's not all music, just a whole variety of things. So I see it as increasing, and I don't know, maybe some of it has to do with the pandemic and all that, but we've seen, I think, an increase. I know the number of letters or emails mostly that we get from listeners, so many of them saying, I just started listening or just started listening again, doing more listening at home, during the pandemic and all that. So it's on the increase.
Jeff, I would donate a mower to get in touch with this school radio guy if there's a way you would feel comfortable connecting us. I'd like to pick his brain on how that experience was for him. Maybe
I'm sorry, who?
The radio guy you mentioned that did a school.
Oh, yeah, if I can find the information, I'd be glad to give it to you. I'll try.
Yeah, because maybe there are some lessons from that experience that could be replicated in other places. I'm guessing for most schools, either high school or college, it would probably be a one-off or a two-off. This is our class project this is one of the class projects you can do for the year. But
it's about,
go ahead.
Even if it's just a class project that's quite small, you've sown the seeds and the idea, and then people can take that on, even if it's just for one term or semester, perhaps. That's it. It's definitely food for thought and some interesting ideas about taking things forward. I like the idea of a working group internationally talking about, plotting and planning and putting a path forward. That sounds good.
My battery's running down, Chrissy, so I'm going to be cut off shortly.
Thank you again.
I'll just sign off now.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks to all. It was great.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Super. Thank you so much.
We need to all sign off really now, because I had scheduled an hour and a half, and it's it's a good sign, I guess, that we've had so much to discuss and positive ideas taking things forward. So thank you to our speakers, and thank you to everyone for coming along and taking part. And I'll keep an eye on the EDXC website. We'll have another one of these in a few months. And if any clubs or organizations in other countries are running meetings, I think this is a great opportunity for us all to meet up regularly and exchange ideas and also positive stories, and just, I don't know, celebrate our love of radio, really.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, thank you, Chrissy. It's been great. Enjoyed it.
Thank you, Jim, as well. That was great.
Thanks, Christine.
Okay, well, everybody take care. Keep taking the vaccinations. Hopefully very soon we can, some of us can meet up in person. And either way, we've got a really solid network now, I think, of talking to each other like this, which is a real plus, I think. So stay safe, everyone, and speak to you all soon.
Thank you.
Right, everyone, take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye all.